This is apropos. Human-caused climate change made the recent European heatwave up to 4 degrees hotter in many cities, resulting in a tripling of the overall death toll. That's according to a study by over a dozen researchers from 5 European institutions. The research comes as the EU's climate monitor Copernicus said last month was the hottest June on record in Western Europe. With the details, here's Siobhan Silk.
A few degrees can be the difference between life and death. That's the warning from the authors of a pan-European study that found the recent European heatwave killed almost 2,500 people in 12 cities. And the researchers say most of them would still be alive if climate change had not pushed temperatures to dangerous highs.
1,500 have only died because of climate change. So they would not have died if it would not have been for our burning of oil, coal and gas in the last century.
Parts of the continent passed a sweltering 40 degrees Celsius last month. A separate report by the European climate watchdog Copernicus finds it was the hottest June on record in Western Europe. The report notes human-caused climate change made the heatwave up to 4 degrees hotter in cities, which have lower tree cover and paved surfaces that store and release heat. The extreme temperatures were not limited to land.
We also saw a marine heatwave in this western part of the Mediterranean basin, and this kind of also reinforced, especially things like nighttime temperatures then not being able to cool down. So which led to a lot of what we call tropical nights.
Those tropical conditions meant no respite from hot temperatures overnight, one of the main factors in heat deaths. As global warming continues unabated, Copernicus warns heat waves will become more frequent and intense and will hit more people across Europe. It's 10 years since the Paris Climate Accords were signed with the goal of limiting long-term global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Scientists say drastic action is required to keep that threshold in sight.
To discuss, we're joined now by Ian Duff, head of Greenpeace International's Stop Drilling, Start Paying campaign. Ian, thanks so much for being with us this evening. Previous studies have evaluated the role played by climate change in flooding or drought. This study was a little bit different. It went further in directly linking coal, oil and natural gas use to the deaths of people during this most recent heatwave. What exactly did it conclude and how did it come to those conclusions?
Yes, well, thank you very much for having me on this evening. And sadly, we've known that heat waves are a silent killer, but this scientific research now shows that climate change from burning oil, gas and coal has made these heat waves 3 times more deadly. And behind these numbers are real people from London, Paris, Milan, Barcelona. It's our parents, our grandparents who are hit hardest, and many are succumbing to heat in their homes. And frankly, it's really shocking. And it's not just in Europe, of course. We're seeing extreme weather driven by the emissions from oil and gas companies making these crises even worse. So, yeah, it's really time that we kind of use these pieces of research as a wake-up call.
And cities like Paris, Milan and Barcelona, Ian, were the worst affected in this heatwave. What do authorities in places like the French capital, in big urban centres, need to actually do to lower the risks then associated with these extreme heat events?
Yes, well, as we just heard, one of the most obvious solutions is transitioning away much faster from oil, gas and coal. That's the only way we can stop heat waves from becoming even worse. But we also need to invest much more in adapting to a warmer world, making our homes, schools and hospitals safe again. And those solutions exist, they're out there, but they all cost money. And that's really the big question that politicians and governments are trying to tackle at the moment, especially when public budgets are strained. So who pays for all this? That's the big question. And what we say is, why not the big oil and gas polluters that have literally made trillions out of fueling this climate crisis? We think it's only fair that they pick up some of the tab.
And when you say that polluters must pay, who exactly are you referring to and what do you want them to do specifically?
Yeah, we're talking about the biggest polluters, the oil, gas, and coal companies, who over the last century or more have been responsible for a large amount of the emissions that are now in our atmosphere. And we're calling on governments to take action to start to tax these oil and gas companies, a new tax that would raise money to pay for the climate damages that they are, after all, responsible for. We think that's the fairest solution. And that's why Greenpeace, along with many other organisations, has just joined a new initiative called the Polluters Pay Pact, which seeks to pressure governments around the world to make oil and gas companies pay their fair share.
And how would such a system work in practice, Ian? And would, laws are obviously different depending on which country these new rules would be implemented if they were to be taken on board by governments.
Yeah, that's right. There's actually a number of initiatives out there at the moment that are promising. Discussions happening at the global level to look at a global tax on oil and gas companies. But it can also happen at the national level. We've seen progress on that in some parts of the world as well. But really, we do need a global solution. Otherwise, what we'll find is that these companies will just move territories. So really key, if we want to deal with a global problem like the cost of climate change, we need a global solution. And taxing oil and gas companies at the global level is a great way of doing that.
How would you get around, though, the inevitable pushback from those big oil and gas firms?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really, really good question. I think it's worth saying that these measures are not only necessary, they're also popular. So a recent global study found that 8 out of 10 people support taxing fossil fuel companies to pay for the impacts from their emissions. So the consensus is there, but governments don't feel it. And that's because they feel the pressure from the oil and gas lobby, just like you've said. So that's why we're saying, it's important that we now come together, groups, concerned citizens, people who face climate change day in, day out, to come together and to say to governments, look, you've got the backing of people. Now let's take the action to make these polluters pay their fair share in order to make our communities and homes safe again.
And you refer to lobbying there. The industry is, of course, accused of funding climate science denial, of blocking energy reform. So how do you guard against that, particularly now when we have such policies coming from the Trump administration in the US?
Yes, I mean, it's absolutely a huge problem. I think what we're seeing, actually, if we want to look at momentum, is the many court cases actually in the US, which are attempting to sue oil and gas companies for climate damages. And they're really leaning into and using evidence from the fact that oil and gas companies lied and were dishonest about climate change, that they've known about this for decades, yet they've taken action to thwart progress. And that makes now acting on climate change even more urgent because of the denial and delay that they led. So actually, I think we're starting to see that the chicken's coming home to roost there. We could see some positive legal results in the US.
And Ian, instead of being forced to pay fines and taxes, some might say it might be better to incentivise these big firms to invest in clean energy. Yes,
they have said that over the last 10 years. But what we've seen actually over the last 2 or 3 years is a huge U-turn from these companies. They pitch themselves as the solution, as the answer to the transition. And in the last few years, they really doubled down on oil and gas. So we really can't trust them to take a lead on this transition. That is why governments must step in, that they must find a way to recover the huge amount of money that these companies have made and put that back into the measures needed to help us recover from climate change. Because that's what is needed to make our homes, our communities and our lives safe again.
And collaboration is also needed as well, isn't it, between various different governments, between industry leaders. There's more lobbying taking place in some of the Middle Eastern states, for example, when compared to what might be happening here at a European level.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, international collaboration on this is important, and there are, processes and measures happening there, and that's why we're calling on governments to kind of come together and look at how they could introduce a new mechanism to recover money from the polluters that have driven the climate crisis. It cannot be beyond the realms of their ability to be able to say, how do we take back some of this money, this huge amount of money? They've made 2.8 billion a day over the past 50 years. Why not take that back and use that to pay for the climate damages that we're all feeling right now?
Ian, thanks for being with us on the programme this evening. We do appreciate your time. That is Ian Duff, Head of Greenpeace International Stop Drilling, Start Paying campaign.
Thank you.
Well, that is it from us for now. Stay with us, though, for more world news.